On a Monday morning in Manhattan, the city pulsed with impatience. Horns blared, heels clicked against the pavement, and ambition hung thick in the air. A crowded bus hissed to a stop in front of a gleaming glass tower. Hamilton and Co. Enterprises. From the bus stepped a young woman. Her sneakers were worn, her blazer faded, her ponytail plain and unremarkable. She clutched a file to her chest. Her eyes lowered as she walked past suited executives who barely noticed her except for the sneers. At the front desk, the receptionist gave her a long, dismissive look. Orientation, intern. HR is that way. Don't touch the glass doors. The girl smiled politely, murmured a thank you, and walked on. Nobody in that lobby knew the truth. The intern they mocked was actually Rachel Hamilton, the real owner and CEO, walking in disguise to see her company without filters. Upstairs, the office bristled under the voice of Richard Cole, the regional director. He stormed through the floor like a tyrant, slamming reports onto desks. "Why is this late again?" he shouted. A timid analyst tried to explain. "Sir, there are inconsistencies. If we sign this, the company could lose." Richard's fist hit the table. "Do as I say, or clear your desk. This isn't a debate, it's my office." Everyone fell silent. They all knew Richard took bribes. They all knew contracts were crooked. But fear was the only language spoken here. Rachel endured her days as the lowest of the low. She fetched coffee until her hands shook. She carried towers of paper, laughed at when they toppled. She was whispered about. She won't last a week. Richard took special pleasure in mocking her. Late again? Girls like you should be grateful just to make copies. Don't even dream of climbing higher. She bowed her head, muttered an apology. But inside, her eyes were cameras, her memory a ledger. She wasn't here to fight. She was here to watch days pass. Nights grew long. And in the quiet hum of the empty office, Rachel uncovered the truth. She noticed one name again and again. North Star Logistics. Their invoices bloated, their fees absurd, their contracts forced through. And always, money flowed back into a shell company, RC Consulting LLC, owned by Richard Cole. She traced the payments. She printed every receipt. She built a dossier thick enough to crush the man who thought himself untouchable. Not everyone was blind. One night in the pantry, Maya Patel, a young project assistant, whispered to her, "Be careful. People who speak too much here disappear." Rachel asked softly, "How many times have you tried to tell the truth?" Maya laughed bitterly. "Enough to know when to stay silent." Rachel leaned in. Silence only feeds men like Richard. What if you weren't alone in finance? Ethan Brooks stared at spreadsheets with pale skin. "It's wrong, I've seen it. But the last time audit tried, they were shut down." "Richard has protection." Rachel's voice was steady. "And if you had protection?" Ethan shook his head. "No one protects us here." Rachel smiled faintly. Maybe it's time someone did. Piece by piece, they gave her what she needed. Maya slipped her invoices. Ethan shared his data. Rachel compiled, copied, numbered. At night, the stack of evidence grew. She wasn't just exposing corruption, she was sharpening the blade. The day of reckoning arrived. In the grand boardroom, glass walls glimmering, Richard Cole basked in his moment. "Ladies and gentlemen," he declared, "this deal with North Star will redefine Hamilton and Co. You can thank me later." A timid voice tried to protest. "Sir, the penalty clause if deadlines slip," Richard roared. "Handled. Just sign." And then, the doors opened. A group of executives entered. At their center Rachel, not in worn sneakers, not with bowed head, but in a black tailored suit. heels striking the floor like a drumbeat of authority. The room gasped, whispers flared. That's the intern. No, that's the Hamilton. Richard staggered, his smile cracking. Ms. Hamilton, I didn't realize what an honor. Rachel dropped a thick folder onto the table, her voice cut like ice. Mr. Cole, I have watched you. The intimidation, the bribes, the contracts that bled this company. You betrayed the values of Hamilton and Co. My name, Richard flailed. I did it for the company. North Star is strategic. The head of legal, Marcus Reed, slid forward documents, payments from North Star, directly into RC Consulting, your company. The CFO, Olivia Grant, flipped pages. Every payment aligned with a contract you forced through. Millions lost. Richard collapsed to his knees. Please, I have a family, don't do this. Rachel's gaze was cold steel. And how many families lived in fear because of you? How many careers you destroyed with arrogance? Her voice rose, final, echoing against the glass walls. As of this moment you are terminated. Security, escort him out. Guards appeared. Richard screamed, begged, fought, but the doors shut behind him, and the empire he thought he owned was gone. Silence. Then Rachel turned to her employees. I never want fear in this workplace again. Hamilton and Co. will stand for integrity. If you work hard, you will be rewarded. If you exploit others, you will not last here. At first, hesitation, then applause. It grew, roared, thundered. Some clapped with tears in their eyes. For the first time in years, hope filled the air. A week later, new policies were announced, anonymous whistleblower lines, rotating audits, triple contract reviews. Maya was promoted, Ethan was rewarded, and the name North Star was erased. One evening, Rachel stood by her office window, Manhattan glowing gold in the sunset. Her reflection stared back, not the intern mocked for old shoes, not the girl carrying coffee, but the woman who reclaimed her empire. They laughed at my sneakers, her voice whispered. They mocked me when I spilled their papers. But true power is not the loudest voice. It is the strength to do what is right. Not for fear, not for applause, but because it must be done. The city lights flickered alive. The office stood taller, brighter, and the girl they mocked became the leader they would never forget. The first week after Richard's exit felt like a thaw after a long winter, but the ice had not fully melted. The office moved more softly, as if testing whether the ground would hold. And for a while it did. Emails lost their edge, meetings had more voices. People breathed, then the headlines arrived. A tech blog led with, Undercover CEO deceives own staff. A finance site followed, Hamilton and Co. Leadership by trickery. The headlines were blood in the water. Camera crews lurked outside the lobby. Rachel stood by her office window, watching tripods grow like weeds across the sidewalk, and wondered whether the truth could outshout a spectacle. She turned back to her desk and hit record. My name is Rachel Hamilton, she said, voice steady. I went undercover because fear had replaced integrity here, not for the show of it, but for the safety of people who had been silenced. If I deceived anyone, it was the man who deceived us all. She stopped the recording, exhaled, and sent the message to communications with a single instruction: release, no edits. Inside, the day beat on. Maya, newly promoted, carried a folder to the glass-walled conference room where Ethan waited with two auditors. We found the vendor split, he said, tapping a spreadsheet. North Star billed us through 3 smaller firms with different names. Same owners. The footprint is messy but familiar. He looked up at Rachel when she stepped in. It's bigger than one man. Then we handle it like it's bigger than one man, Rachel replied, pulling a chair. We handle it like an infection, identify the pathways, seal the wounds, clean the blood. The auditors shared a look, half respect, half worry. There's something else, one of them said. A large invoice paid yesterday. It cleared hours before Richard was escorted out. Rachel's jaw tightened. Amount, $780,000. To whom? Harbor Point Storage, Brooklyn Pier. The room thinned around them. Harbor Point had handled overflow inventory for Hamilton & Co. Temporary, logistical, forgettable. She pictured the pier, the corrugated metal doors, the forklift lanes that smelled of diesel. Pull everything tied to Harbor Point, Rachel said. Contracts, emails, delivery logs, camera footage. If a paperclip touched that pier, I want to see the receipt. By afternoon, she had a map on the screen so dense with lines it resembled a web illuminated from within. Money moved like machinery, smooth on the outside, terrifying beneath. The Harbor Point invoice came with a clause Rachel had never seen, a stability surcharge for expedited hazard mitigation. Her spine cooled. Hazard from what? Maya leaned forward. There was a memo last year, she murmured. A fire suppression inspection that failed. Someone hid it inside a maintenance update. Rachel pointed. Find that memo. They found it, buried under an innocuous subject line. Quarterly checklist pier operations. The lines were bland. But one sentence clawed out from the middle. System pressure irregular. Foam cannons not guaranteed to deploy under heat load. Signed by a North Star connected engineer. Acknowledged by a Harbor Point manager, forwarded to Richard's office. Then swallowed whole by silence. Pull the calendar, Rachel said. The calendar displayed a meeting from 6 months earlier. Our CHP storage mitigation plan. No minutes attached, no follow-ups, no receipts, only the quiet that follows a closed door. She looked at Maya, then at Ethan. We end this. Legally, loudly, fully, at dusk. She called legal and the CFO. Marcus, I need a preservation letter to Harbor Point and North Star affiliates. Lock down everything. Olivia, freeze any pending payments under their umbrellas. If they call, tell them to speak to counsel. On it, Olivia said, and Rachel. Investors are rattled. Kestrel Capital just requested a special board session. Kestrel, the activist fund that circled troubled water like a patient shark. Schedule it, Rachel said. Give me 20 minutes with them before the full board. The next morning dawned with the edge of a blade. Rachel stepped into the boardroom with a folder so thin it looked empty. You'll want to see this, she began, placing a single page in front of Kestrel's managing partner, a man whose suit sat on him like a decision already made. The sheet showed two bars, cost of corruption and cost of correction. The latter was larger. You're asking us to believe it will cost more to fix than to let rot, he asked. I'm asking you to notice the second column, Rachel replied, tapping the page again. The numbers rearranged in a small animation cut to long-term savings, risk reduction, brand value, legal liabilities avoided. Correction is expensive in the short term, she said. Integrity is profitable over time. If you're here for this quarter's sugar high, you will hate me. If you're here for the company your grandchildren will still own, you'll see what I see. He looked at her for a long breath. And if we don't, then you become part of my problem. The room went very still. And I, gentlemen, am very good at solving problems. They voted to wait for 1 quarter, for one plan, for one woman who stood like a ledge between them and something worse. Not a win. Not a loss. A stay of execution that had to be earned. By noon, the press camped again on the sidewalk, eager to turn whispers into storms. Communications played the message she'd recorded. Some anchors rolled their eyes, others nodded. That night, the clip of Rachel saying fear had replaced integrity passed 1 million views. Commenters argued as if paid to. But inside the building, something small and stubborn and good began to crawl toward the light. She didn't go home early. She rarely went home at all at 10 p.m. There was a knock on her door. Ethan stood there, a ghost of his usual precision. "We have an issue," he said, "the Brooklyn Pier. There's been a small accident. No injuries reported, yet." The word "yet" is a door that opens into a cold room. What happened? A forklift hit a rack. A crate fell, spilled a solvent. The fire suppression didn't fire. Rachel was already grabbing her coat. "Call Marcus. Call the city. I'm going down there at the pier." Blue light strobed against metal. The air smelled sharp. Like a warning, a fire captain met Rachel near a taped-off bay. "You're lucky," he said. "This could have been 10 times worse." "We're not lucky," Rachel answered. "We're negligent, and we're done being either." She stood in front of the failed cannon, the rust ring around a nut that should never have rusted, the faint, oily sheen on concrete that told the truth of cheap maintenance and cheaper promises. She took out her phone, hit video, and spoke to her staff through the lens. "This is what a hidden memo looks like when it grows up," she said quietly. "We will never hide one again." She posted it to the internal network before she could second-guess the instinct. Marcus arrived, coat flapping in the river wind, preservation letters sent. He said, "The city will want statements, so will the U.S. attorney." "Then we give them everything," Rachel said. "We stop acting like a company with something to hide." The next day the headlines pivoted. Hamilton CEO at accident site overnight. Suppression failure under ex-director's watch. The internet, as always, tried to be a jury. Inside, Rachel met with the warehouse teams, the truckers, the people who moved the world for a living. "You deserved better," she told them, and left with the names of 3 supervisors who'd been told to make the inspection pass. By Friday, her plan had a spine. She announced a vendor amnesty. Any supplier who came forward within 30 days with evidence of bribery or coercion could renegotiate without blacklisting. She introduced a whistleblower bonus. The legal team tightened contracts like stitches, and slowly, the web began to untangle, threads pulling threads, knots relaxing under pressure. Sunday evening, when the sky turned the color of old gold, her phone buzzed with a call she didn't expect. The number was blocked. She answered anyway. "Rachel," Richard's voice said. He sounded smaller, like a man speaking from the bottom of a well. "You've made a mistake." She didn't sit. "No," she replied evenly. "I corrected one." "You think you can scrub history?" His breath was ragged. "North Star isn't a vendor. It's a door. You think you closed it, but you opened another one. Is that a threat?" "It's a map," he said. "Follow their parent shells. You'll hit Arcadian Freight. Follow Arcadian. You'll hit Glenhurst Holdings. After that, you'll find someone with a nicer office than yours." The line clicked dead. Rachel stared at the wall, then at the city, then back at the wall again. Names were keys. She wrote them down. On Monday, she put a research team on the shelves. By Wednesday, the picture sharpened. Glenhurst Holdings owned a slice of a competitor who had bet against Hamilton and Co. 2 quarters running. Arcadian Freight CFO had once worked at Kestrel Capital. None of it was definitive. All of it was suggestive. She let the board know in a memo that refused to accuse and refused to flinch. Kestrel called for their session early. The same managing partner leaned back, fingers steepled. "You're weaving conspiracies, Ms. Hamilton." "No," Rachel said. "I'm reading a tapestry. If you don't like the pattern, change the loom." "You're saying we're complicit." I'm saying anyone who profits from rot becomes its advocate. Decide what you're advocating. He held her gaze longer this time, then nodded once curtly. Deliver your quarter. I'll deliver my company, she corrected, and left before he could smile. The quarter became a cliff with her name on it. She built bridges over air. She called 3 smaller logistics firms run by women who had been frozen out by the old regime and offered them terms that lifted their margins without sinking hers. She restructured insurance with a safety rebate that paid only when the injury numbers declined. She sent a video to every manager demonstrating how to refuse a bribe: script, sentences, posture, a new corporate reflex. She met the union. She met the interns. She met the night shift she'd never met when she was an intern in name only. At 2 a.m. one Thursday, she found Maya still at her desk, hair up, glasses fogged with concentration. Go home, Rachel said. You first, Maya answered, without looking up. Rachel smiled. Fair, Rachel, Maya said, finally lifting her eyes. Do you ever regret going undercover? Not the rightness of it, the cost. Rachel thought about the lobby receptionist, the laughter, the paper towers slipping. Regret is a soft word, she said. I felt it sometimes. Then I saw what fear did to you, to Ethan, to the warehouse team at the pier, and regret became a luxury I couldn't afford. Maya nodded, and a small, defiant warmth filled the space between them. 2 weeks later, the U.S. Attorney's office called. They had opened an inquiry into North Star and Harbor Point. Marcus briefed the staff, reminding them that truth was a shield, not a weapon, and that shields work only when raised together. Rachel met the prosecutors with open files and no hedges. If we're part of the damage, she said, then we're part of the repair. A day after that, Glenhurst Holdings made its move, an open letter to the board, citing uncertainty and reputational risk, suggesting leadership transitions in the interest of shareholder value. Kestrel was silent in public, but individuals on the board called Rachel privately with voices that said they could hear the storm and wished it would rain somewhere else. She wrote a response that refused to wrestle in mud. She outlined metrics: reduced vendor costs by 11% in a month, injury reports down 9% at pilot sites, whistleblower line volume up, a good sign, if you believe Sunlight was, and the beginnings of a safety rebate cut that might save more money than any bribe ever could. She ended with a sentence that fit on a postcard and landed like a verdict: short-term fear is not a strategy. The day of the quarterly call arrived. Analysts stacked on the line like dominoes, waiting to fall. Rachel opened with the numbers, clean and unadorned, then spent the bulk of her time on systems: how they broke, how they would be repaired, how the repairs would be measured. This is not a narrative about a villain, she said, surprising even herself. It's a narrative about an institution learning to be better at being good. When questions came, she answered them as if announcing the weather, predictable where she could be, transparent where she could not. The stock flattened for a day, no surge, no crash. A mirror refusing to distort a face. The board exhaled in emails that tried not to sound like relief. That night, Rachel walked through the floors without an entourage. She saw Ethan teaching a junior analyst how to reconcile a shipment with grace instead of panic. She saw Maya drafting a training module called Courage in Practice. She saw the receptionist look up and in a very small voice ask, "Do you need any help, Ms. Hamilton?" And she saw the way the woman's shoulders dropped when Rachel answered, "Not tonight, thank you," like forgiveness where none had been requested. Near midnight, the elevator doors opened onto a floor she hadn't visited since the beginning, storage for archived contracts, a paper museum of decisions. The lights buzzed with the sound of old insects. Rachel opened a box at random. Inside lay a contract signed the year she was born, her father's name a dark thread across the bottom. She traced the signature with a finger that shook. A note paper clipped to the back, scribbled in his hand, "A good contract is a promise to behave yourself when no one is looking." She closed the box and leaned back against the cold metal shelving, eyes threatening to soften. In the quiet, her phone vibrated, a text from an unknown number. A photo of the pier foam cannon repaired, green tags fluttering in the lamplight. The caption simple, "It works now." She didn't reply. She didn't need to. The next morning brought a different sound to the lobby, the sound of laughter that wasn't mean. The receptionist smiled without flinching. People took the elevator together who hadn't spoken in months. Rachel walked through it all like a visitor to a country she had built but never truly seen outside. Cameras still lived on the sidewalk. Inside, something else lived louder. Not everything healed. A senior manager resigned, bitter in his farewell note. A supplier tried to slip a gift card inside a binder. A rumor shot across the open office that Rachel was about to sell a division she had no intention of touching, but each flare-up died faster than before. Like a body remembering how to lower a fever, on a Tuesday around noon, Kestrel's managing partner asked for a private coffee. He watched her over the rim of his cup, calculating in a way he likely thought was invisible. "You're making enemies," he said. "I'm making a list," Rachel answered. "It's shorter than I expected." He smiled, not unkindly. "You've bought time." "No," she said, "I've rented it. The rent is due every quarter, perhaps every day." "Then pay it," he said, and left. And for once she wasn't sure if he meant it as a warning or a dare. By the end of the month, safety incidents dropped again. The internal forum's most read post was no longer a complaint but a story, a junior logistician recounting how her supervisor refused a bribe with words Rachel had scripted, how the room had gone quiet, then nodding, then relief. The second most read post was a photo, Maya's team laughing in a training session, sticky notes everywhere. The caption, "We're learning to say no so we can mean yes." On the last Friday of the quarter, Rachel returned to the Brooklyn pier at sunset. The river moved like metal under the pink sky. She stood beneath the repaired cannon and thought about all the things that worked only when you didn't notice them: sprinklers, brakes, conscience. The Harbor Point manager walked up, hat in his hands. "I wanted to say thank you," he said. "Not for the heat. For the light." Rachel nodded. "Don't thank me," she said. "Run it right." "That's thanks enough." As she turned to leave, her phone pinged with a calendar reminder, town hall 15 minutes. She made it back with seconds to spare, stepped onto the stage, and faced the company. Faces looked up, expectant. She read none of the speech she'd written. She spoke instead with the voice of the woman who had carried coffee and the woman who had carried a company. "We will still fail sometimes," she said. "We will still be tempted. We will still be afraid. But fear will not be our law, and temptation will not be our plan. I cannot promise you comfort. I can promise you meaning. I can promise you work worth doing. I can promise you that if you do the right thing, you will not stand alone." Silence gathered, then broke into applause that felt less like thunder and more like weather finally clearing. Afterward, as people drifted back to their desks, Rachel stood alone for a moment on the stage, looking at the empty chairs, the way light pooled on the floor. The echo of 1,000 steps on a building that, for the first time in a long time, walked with her. On her desk, someone had left a small box. Inside lay a pair of new sneakers, plain, clean, soft to the touch, with a note that said, "For the days you choose to walk among us again." She laughed, the sound surprised out of her, and slipped them on in her office. Then walked the hallways that had once chewed her to the bone and now seemed to nibble at her laces like a joke. When she reached the lobby, the cameras were still there. She pushed through the glass doors and the flashbulbs bloomed like flowers. A reporter shouted, "Miss Hamilton, are you the hero or the villain of this story?" Rachel didn't slow. "Neither," she said. "I'm the editor." She stepped into the city that still pulsed with impatience and promise, and for a brief, ordinary second, it felt like both were on her side. And if not today, then tomorrow. And if not tomorrow, then the day after that. Because the girl they mocked had not only been the CEO, she had become the person who made sure the next girl wouldn't need to pretend to be anyone but herself.